timing right. If I hurry up at the end, that means that I didn't. But you feel free to stop me in the middle if you'd like me to, expound on anything further. We can do that. If not, usually I take the questions at the end. Hopefully we'll have a full 15 minutes. I'm the chair of the media committee at the American Academy of Mental Health and Psychiatry, meaning the committee that deals with the media's effects on children, and then also the interface between our profession and the media. So they both are important topics. We definitely want to put our best face forward and educate the public on a lot of mental health issues that probably are underrepresented in general. And then these days, media issues have become a profound part of kids' lives, and professionals and parents and families have to remain abreast. And you'll notice the what are we in the parentheses, which I've added to the title. I didn't think this was a child psychiatry only audience, so I want everyone to consider that these issues, while I'm going to focus on children, this is a modern living issue. This is not really just about children. All of us face the challenge of how to use media wisely and how much to utilize it and how much is too much information and all those things. It's not an easy task to properly manage. I have no conflicts of interest. I'm sure you'll notice during this presentation that no one would probably pay me to promote any particular product based on what I'm telling you. I'm going to give you a case, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the definition of displacement, which is an idea of media pushing away other things in people's lives. I'm going to talk about some data on it. I'm going to talk about how to sort of diagnose or think about media issues, impacts on families and kids, and I'm going to talk about treatment. I put up this picture when I first started doing these grand rounds. My grandma was actually still alive. She was born in 1909 and made it about 100 years. And when she grew up, she would be only addressed directly by people, which is just a really interesting concept today, that kids would only see the things that are right around them, and they mostly would get information meant for kids or what they happened to see in the city of Chicago where she lived, whatever was happening in her neighborhood directly. Now, boy, kids have a real different experience, don't they? So we have all these sources of information coming into children's brains, and many of them, I think even the most pro-media person would say probably not intended for children, and certainly not intended for developmental. My grandma's 3 in this picture, so certainly not for a 3-year-old. So these challenges have wound up through the years. When my grandma got older, they started having talkies, and they got a telephone eventually where she said they had to put nickels in. She'd have to go down the building shared the phone. And then my mom grew up in an age where they did have, radios and TVs, but those were rarely used, a lot less. They certainly were careful around, people today. The younger generations don't remember, calling Sunday night after 11 and making the conversation really quick. And then, we can get in less than a minute. I mean, that's how the world sort of used to be, rarely using these communication devices. And now, kids fully integrated with all sorts of media connections. Times have really changed. So I'm going to give you a case study. So Jermaine is a 15-year-old inner city kid, 8th grade, but really functions like a 6th grader. He's been held back twice. He comes from a single mom. Dad's not involved. He's got a bunch of sibs. House is pretty chaotic. When I first saw him, had just gotten in trouble for a bunch of things, including marijuana use. And he was a heavy user. He also was seeing a psychiatrist, a spotty follow-up, but was prescribed Seroquel to go to sleep and a stimulant, diagnosed with ADHD and possibly bipolar disorder. But in terms of his media history, he had TV and video games in his room since about age 3. He had a smartphone for about the last year. He averaged about 12, if you talk with multitasking-wise, 12 hours of media per day, because he would turn on the TV in the morning usually, got home, would turn the TV on, would start playing video games right away. He also had buds in his ears all the time. So he really got about 12, which is really an average amount for his age group, in these days in America. When you talk about the content, his favorite video game, was Grand Theft Auto, Madden he played. This is pretty similar to most guys. Those are common choices. Menace to Society, Martin, Everyone Loves Chris. I mean, just when I hear those things, it does say a lot to me. What choices kids make with media, it's a little bit of a window to their soul when they tell you what their favorite thing is. And then Lil Boosie's a local rapper, and Lil Wayne's local, but nationally you know him. So that's the kind of music that he listened to. Like I said, he called himself, and his mom called him bipolar because he, got crazy and flipped out and broke things and stuff like that. But he wasn't clear to me that he was bipolar. He never had what I considered a real manic episode. Doesn't up at night, often accessing media. But both he and his mother were, he can't concentrate, absolutely needs his Adderall, got to keep him on the Adderall. So I will get back to that. But this is a not uncommon presentation of kids that I see, and then you're trying to unravel all these issues and figure out, well, what's going on with this kid? So I'm going to go, I mentioned the word displacement. So displacement is when electronic media take time and focus and energy away from other things. And so for kids, we are most concerned about their academic performance and learning, that exercise, moving their body around, and sleep. And so, what's the data on it? The National Health and Nutrition study from 2008 data shows that, this is very similar to many other large surveys, that most kids are not meeting the recommendations. So 38% of 6 to 11-year-olds met both of the recommendations for the physical activity and the media use. If you're an obese kid, you're more likely to not meet the recommendations. And as kids get older, they're less likely to meet the recommendations. So it kind of seems as time accumulates and kids get more and more into media and more connected to them. Interestingly, with the exercise bit, many of the kids who are high energy kids who get a lot of exercise are also heavy media users. So there doesn't seem to be, or there's a loose correlation between heavy media use and less exercise. So there's two different ways to think about this. One is that population-wise, that the heavy media users don't have a problem, or you could say that all of our kids have a problem, including the heavy media users, because that seems to also be the case. Even if you do the recommended amount of exercise, a lot of people believe that's still not really enough exercise for kids, and they need to move more than that to really be healthy. Certainly, to keep weight off, exercise alone, at the guidelines levels won't do that. And then if you look in this study, just like many other studies, minority kids more heavily into media use. So you have more of an issue with minority kids. So another study, and this is an interesting one, like I said, that once again backed up by many other studies, but this is a good example. They looked at kids at 23 months. So this is before their second birthday, and they measured how much screen time they're getting, and then they looked back again at 53 months. Right? So that you have two time frames on this, and how much screen time a kid is getting before their second birthday correlated with a whole bunch of other issues. And so if you get that screen time when you're 23 months, then when they looked out to fourth grade, each hour per week of TV correlated with a 7% unit decrease of classroom engagement, a 6% decrease in math, no change in reading, which is interesting, but a 9% unit decrease in fitness and a 13% unit decrease in weekend physical activity. So when we look at the trajectory of these kids' lives, the ones with heavy media exposure seem to be on pathways that are not as good, and it raises issues about what these kids are then liking and getting into when you see on the weekend that they're less likely also to be out doing physical activity, those ones that have a lot of screen time exposure. I highlighted the reading issue. Does anyone have a guess on why the reading did not change for these fourth graders that had a good bit of media exposure? Well, 3-year-olds, so this is my theory, no one really has an answer for this, but 3-year-olds are often watching educational content, right? They don't change the channel and choose the content as much as older kids. And so younger kids tend to get put in front of Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers, and actually the data is pretty decent on those, that they can help a kid learn, and they do learn their letters and numbers and stuff from those. There's a lot of pro-social messages on TV for early kids. And so my guess, although we don't really know, is why maybe there wasn't such a drop-off, is that they may have actually been learning something from these early programs. So, I'm going to get into all the different media kids use, but it's interesting. TV is still, quote-unquote, the elephant in the room. So TV is the dominant media exposure for most kids, and the impacts of TV are pretty clear and pretty clearly negative. There's some really interesting studies. So in obese adults, if you have a TV in your room, you're going to watch 5.4 hours per day, whereas if you don't have a TV in your room, you watch 3.6 hours per day. So that TV in a bedroom is also correlated with having more TV exposure, which is a problem. Not surprisingly, children's TV use correlates very highly with their parents' use. So once again, something that's repeatedly shown in studies is that the parental use is very, very much affects the kids' use. And so the issue is, in these families, we know that the kids are watching TV. Is there any data to say that's a problem? How do we really know? And it's really hard to do longitudinal long-term studies on what the outcomes are. We're concerned. If you look at the top study, the Stayano study, this data is all from that. This is in Louisiana. You'll notice that if you have a TV in your bedroom, now some of these are non-significant, but even if they're not, they're higher. So you're going to have higher BMI, more fat mass, more subcutaneous adipose tissue, more visceral adipose tissue, bigger waist circumference, more HDL, more triglycerides, HDL, glucose. Your insulin level is much higher, right? So your systolic blood pressure higher. So all these things are being measured in 11-year-olds, and the difference between a TV in your room and not TV in your room is huge. And it's also the big difference between not having a lot of media exposure, because that's the other side of the graph, or having heavy. And it seems to be that 3 to 4 is almost as bad as 5 or more. That once you get up to 3 or 4 hours of TV per day, you're starting your march towards cardiovascular disease. Which that's how I would put it. And if any of you are familiar with the Circulation article from 2011, everything they tried to separate out still left it. That TV time, it leads to mortality. So as far as medical science knows, watching TV kills you. I mean, they separated everything out they could, and TV time is correlated with mortality. So the reality is that kids are accessing lots of TV, and on every single way that we've measured it, it has bad outcomes. What else do we know about kids in media? So the Kaiser Family Foundation have come out with a series of 3 really large studies, and some of their conclusions that each 5-year thing is that the media use totally changed. How they use it, what they're accessing. So this is changing and growing, and I have some really new data to show you on that. There's a negative correlation between screen time and grades. That's very clear. Boys are heavier users and have more academic problems. And that, like I saw in that other study, a lot of the heavy users are also big exercisers and do move around a lot. So one of my takes on that is partially what you're catching is a lot of high-energy boys that love video games and active stuff, and also love sports and are very active and do a lot of sports. So to dive deeper into that, so this is what from the 2010 study had: 4.5 hours of TV, more than an hour of video games, hour and a half of computers, 2.5 of music. That's over 10 multitasked into 7 hours. So that's the 2010 data. That's the amount of media exposure that that's a national representative sample. So if you're a boy and you have a video game console in your room, you're going to do about an hour and a half of TV. There's many boys that don't play any video games or very little. But if you got that console in your room, you're going to average about an hour and a half. And then it's pretty consistent that the girls do more social media and more print media and access it in that kind of way. So I call them Davidians, the kids that are heavy media users. You'll notice that if you go from light to heavy, you're more than twice as likely to fail or have poor grades. You're more than twice as likely to get in trouble. You're about 50% more likely to be unhappy or sad, and you're about a quarter more likely to get easily bored, right? So it's pretty incredible the difference on a correlational, the wide scale study, though with light media use, better outcomes, and heavy media use, and some outcomes we really don't like. And so what I'm showing you there is the 2010 study. About 10 days ago, Common Sense Media came out with the new study, right? So this is very new information. It just you may have seen it on the news just recently. So I haven't had a chance to fully go through it, but I thought I should throw this into the ground round so you all saw what the new data says. The tweens are the 8 to 12-year-olds, and the teens are the 13 to 18s. So basically for the tweens, which is 8 to 12-year-olds, that's 6 hours of media per day for them. And for the teens, it's about 9 hours. And you can look at the breakdown. Everyone's heavily, music is very heavily represented. Lots of the teens are really texting a lot. And, that's my 13-year-old, text all the time. TV's still big. They use social media. Let me move on. So these days, too, tablets and phones have really taken over a lot of the use. So even if they're watching TV, a lot of them are watching it now on a tablet. They're downloading it, and it's going on a tablet, and they're moving with it, or they're taking them with it. And even when many parents try to restrict these, but it goes in the bed under the covers, and they watch, so they can hide. So now you have to be really more careful about what you're allowing them to access, because it's so portable and so easy for them to use it. And so even the tweens, 24% have a smartphone, and 67%, so 2/3 of the teens have smartphones now. So this is the way our society has moved, and this is something that as child psychiatrists and psychiatrists, we now have to sort of meet people where they're at and understand what their media use is and how this is affecting them. So, surprise, they said is the headline, TV and music still dominate. So it really, they're still getting lots of TV. Some of it might have moved on to tablets and stuff, but TV is still a big player. And that research I showed you before is TV-based research. Of course, the media changes so fastly. The content's always changing, and how they access is changing so fast that any study that you do, by the time that study hits the presses, media use has changed and it's somewhat obsolete, or its half-life is very, very short. So this is also one of those issues where you have to continually relook at it, and also it might be better to focus on how you approach it than to focus on exactly what today's data is, because tomorrow's data will be different. And so to get back to the theme of displacement, sleep is something that everyone seems pretty concerned about. Anytime you look at a major study that comes out, teens are sleeping less, kids are sleeping less, and electronics are correlated with it. So all the reviews have said that the amount of electronics kids interact with is affecting their sleep. Interactive electronics, especially video games, has pretty clear data. When you have video games and you're playing them into the night, you're going to get less sleep, but the quality of your sleep is also going to be less. And Lauren Hale, who's one of the world's leading researchers, her belief is that any interactive media, social media, and anything that kind of lights you up psychologically is also particularly pernicious. So we have less data on the social media, but she believes it to be almost as harmful as the video games. So the reality is that there's that people are using this stuff later, or ding, their phone goes off and they're waking up, and then they're up, and then if it was something that was interesting to them, now they're psychologically aroused. It's hard for them to go to sleep. But she differs with Seisler from Harvard, believes pretty strongly, and when you see him present, that the light coming into the kid's eyes and the exposure to that light is also a pretty significant disruptor. you don't have as good a science on that. So, and there's sort of the two different camps. She's worried about it, but she doesn't really feel that it's maybe that strong. He thinks it's pretty strong, that just by putting a screen that's emitting light in front of your face and staring at it for a few hours, that you're messing up your sleep just outright. And so he has a little bit of data. It's not the strongest, but about people reading a book before they go to bed, where you'd only get the reflective light versus reading on a tablet, and the tablet was worse. So there is some concern. He didn't even know you could blacklight the tablet, though, frankly. Someone has to. So this is part of the challenge with today's researchers. You got a guy who's in his 70s, and he doesn't really keep up. And so they could have done a better study if they would have done that, too. But regardless, the idea of sleep being disrupted by media, is clearly substantiated by the research. What are some of the big problems? The more devices you have in a kid's room, the worse the sleep. So the amount that they go up correlates with how much sleep is being disruptive. The phones that are on at night are really disruptive. Because even if once in a while a text is really important, or a thing that comes from Facebook or some other social media is really important to them, then they have that. That's like grandma with the slot machines, She just needs to hit once, and then all of a sudden, that intermittent reinforcement really gets them. And so then they hear it at night and they're like, well, I better check it out, let me see. Maybe something really good's happening. And so, or really bad's happening. So the phone really has to be off. That's a major issue with sleep. And TV in the bedroom, just like I was saying before, it's like putting donuts in the bedroom, yeah, don't eat them. We're just going to put some donuts in your room. I mean, kids don't not eat donuts. I mean, they use the TV if it's in the room, especially if it has cable with all the bad channels. I mean, they're going to watch it, right? So, and then when you look at what lack of sleep does, I mean, we're all physicians that have gone through, I flew in, I got in at 12:30 last night, so, I know, so you're getting like 90% today. I'm definitely not 100%. But sleepiness, sleep quality and duration are correlated with academic performance. We know that people don't perform academically at their best when they don't sleep. Sleep loss is related to learning capacity, academic performance, declarative memory, procedural learning. And interestingly, when parents are active about sleep and just set any kind of doesn't matter what time, but they actually set a bedtime, that helps kids sleep better. And so this, once again, the message is pretty clear that if parents are active and they're just going to make a firm stand on this, that this was going to help kids function better and sleep more. Academics, you saw from that Kaiser Family Foundation that this is something, of course, we're concerned about. Are kids learning, and the access that they have to all these leisure and some learning opportunities, but all this media then displacing that? I'd say 4 out of 5 studies say yes. So you get some studies that show that these are heavy users, or these are multitaskers, or these are people who are really into media, and then their outcome is okay. So there are null studies. I don't want to present it that every single study says that there's a negative impact, but about 4 out of 5 say that there is. So, and then you wonder, and then video games seem to be particularly bad for some reason, and so people are wondering why video games seem to be more disruptive for academic activities than other things. Some theories about how engaging they are. They might be just that fun, and now they're so real, and people get so into them that maybe after studying your math homework after that, maybe just like impossible for the human brain. I don't know, but video games seem to be worse. And so there does seem to be a pretty clear pattern of displacement of academics or interference with academics. And then this is you can see the little Facebook thing. What's on your mind? I think I'm flunking out of school. So, so kids who are constantly on social media and constantly have what a researcher would call continuous partial attention to a media device on them are not really ever focused on what they're supposed to be focusing on. And so kids should really turn this stuff off when they do their homework. Even if they went back once an hour and checked and triaged their messages, that'd be a lot better than, if you've been around a 13-year-old recently who has a phone, it's like ding, 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 the thing's going off. If you guys treat kids, these phones are going off all the time. They can't concentrate on their work when that's happening. We have it because we have our phones for work, so it's hard for us to and we know how that messes us up. So there's many mechanisms. What could be interfering with the academic performance of these kids? They do seem to sleep less. Is there something about focus So Dmitry Kristopher from the University of Washington has lots of studies on the correlations and some now studies on the causation about media exposure and focus. And it does seem to be that early media exposure may reduce your ability to focus, and there may be some real problem with putting screens in front of kids' faces and having a large amount of screen time all through childhood. Is it a demotivator on some kind of psychological level? Is the content that our kids will get through media the kind of things that are going to make them want to be great scholars? Because if you look at what they actually watch, when they're real little, you can make them watch, Mr. Rogers and Sesame Street. But once they get a little older and they know how to work that remote and, mom or dad is not paying attention anymore, they mostly watch crap. I mean, you just gotta look at what the ratings are. It's crap. And if you look at what they sell in those programs, I mean, Nickelodeon has continually refused to stop selling junk to kids. And Disney's a little bit better because Disney's so big they can just cross-market. That's basically what they do for most of it. But so they sell everything that they advertise is just a poison. I would never, so this is the sad truth in 2015 America. If it says for kids, it's horrible for kids. Don't ever give it to your kid if it's for kids. And so that's the reality of what Nickelodeon sells, and that's what kids watch. So over time, is there a negative impact through them wanting to, they make them more consumerist, it gets them into junk food, it gets them into wanting, products that they probably don't really need. There's lots of provocative messages that kids are getting at an early age, and somehow that not making them into the great scholar that we want them to be. There is some personality development arguments and some research on it. Kids that play more video games, they become more rebellious and end up doing things like smoking more, drinking more, and doing other things. There's no advertisements for drinking or smoking in the video games. So it's not related. So how is that causing that? And so the researchers are kind of believing that there's a personality development piece of this. A lot of time spent doing these things or watching these things change these children and may change them in ways that make them not into academic type kids. Oh, and reading. The reading is huge. So if kids are not getting reading, then this is blowing everything up because kids really have to be good readers in order to become academics. So I won't spend a lot of time on the social interaction data, but we are wondering, and there's some data to make us concerned about, all this time with the screen in front of your face, do you then have trouble tuning into a real person? Are you reading social cues right? Are you understanding how to address adults properly? Are you understanding how to make friends? If you spend all your time with electronics, you may be very adept at getting around a computer and texting and all that, but you may not have the social skills you need to make the more important connections in life. And there's this whole idea of social capital, and this ability to make friends and connect with people has huge outcomes related to it. So, it really is important one way or another, and there is a question whether media is interfering with that. And then, is media interfering with our interactions with nature? So, you have to frame human beings, yes, within the realities of our, biological beings programmed for a different world. Are we really made, is this sensory overload bad for us? And it does seem, and there's pretty good research, especially in the last 10 years, about biophilia. Why do we have 2 plants in the room? Why do we like having natural light? Why do we want windows? Why do we like to be near the sea or ocean? All those things are programmed into us, and we love nature by the way we are created. And when you have people that live in non-natural environments, it may be stressing them in kinds of ways that bring out negative properties. And so this, if you read The Nature Principle by Louvre, he'll go through all the research on it, and it's very compelling. I always mention the Ulrich gallbladder surgery studies. Does anyone know about those? These? So they went back and reviewed. They had a hospital, brick wall on one side, forest on the other. If you got the room that looked out to the greenery, you healed faster and had less complications from your surgeries. They reviewed all these charts just on that side of the hospital. You do better. So people who have those exposures to nature tend to do better. Pretty amazing study, and that type of stuff has been replicated, right? Just having a window, and that your cortisol's up. If you put the news on, that raises people's cortisol in a waiting room. If you put a picture of nature, it's slightly better. If you have a window, it'll lower it, right? So we now are getting to know some of these things. It really has an effect on people. We want to be exposed to nature. These electronics are stopping that. So Internet Explorer says you've been logged on for 1 year. Do you wish to log off and get a life? Yes or no? Remind me next year, is what most kids are saying. So, and before I go on too much, the positive effects I do want to say that media, while I've been talking negative about media content, once again, if you have media that's teaching good values and teaching pro-social cooperation, it does seem to affect kids in a positive way. And there's some video games that do that. And so these games seem to get more cooperation and positive action from the kids. And the media and the news and just these ways to access information has brought our world together in a lot of ways that I don't want to diminish. So part of the rights revolution and people coming together and understanding that we're one planet and one people has been aided very much by the media. And so there is a lot of good there to be accessed, and it has done good. I'm just saying that most of the time people get junk. So the reality is, the possibility is there, and a lot of people are getting good stuff mixed in with a lot of junk. And so I kind of think about it as a media being in the middle of the neighborhood and the school and the family and the peers, and it's all mixed together. And you just have to figure out where are the impacts, and are there any impacts that are particularly important for your patient. Usually, we just interact on the patient and family level, so that's where we have to put our energy. Obviously, these bigger public health issues are important, but we can't really touch them. So when I think about displacement effects in kids, I'm thinking, well, are they having lots of different, they're playing video games, and they're watching TV, and they're doing social media, and are those all problems, or is it just one of those that's a problem? Right? So it may just be one, or it could be, well, it doesn't matter what device, but the thing is that you're just not getting any exercise, and that's the problem, right? So it may be about the device, or it may be about the thing that they're losing, and you just need to tune into what's going on. Are there multiple devices? Is there one that's the real problem? Is there multiple displacement effects, or is there one that's the real problem? And then you just negotiate from there. You also may have these kids, sometimes you go to grandma's house, there's nothing to play, they do their homework there, they're fine. I have kids that say, I do my homework at school, I don't want to go home, because I can't do my homework at home, because there's too many distractions. So they do their homework in places where they don't have media and things to do better. When they're around all the media, they skip it, they'd rather do the media. So, is it everywhere? And do they have breaks? If kids just at least go to summer camp and can put their phone down, that's probably really good for them. If there's times that they have, if they go on a media fast for the weekend, that's probably really good for kids. And then what else are the things that are associated? Sometimes media could be a way to get around, to interact with people, and there may be some hidden positives or hidden negatives, because you're associating with people that also access this media, and that can be good for you or bad. While I'm mostly being negative about the media, lots of kids socialize through playing video games and watching sports together, or watching a show they like together, and this is now part of our cultural identity and our communication thing. So definitely kids do de-stress themselves at times by playing games, and so many of these kids, even playing violent games, it makes probably some of them more violent, but many of them just play the game and they go back to their life, and they actually cool down through it. So all those are real things, and you have to tease them out by knowing the patient and knowing what's going on. So I'm getting back to my case study. If you remember, we had the 15-year-old who had come in, and he had was on medicines and had all these problems. Well, I weaned him off of the Seroquel, and I just stopped flat his Adderall. And he said, I'm going to click out. He threatened that he was going to click out, but he didn't. And he was found to not be hyperactive, anxious, or have a mood disorder. So you kind of know what kind of work I do. Does anyone have a guess of what happened? He got a complete media fast via incarceration. So this kid who got locked up, who swore that he needed these meds and he couldn't do anything, and he couldn't sleep at night and all this, well, when he was incarcerated, he starts reading, just like many of the kids. A large segment of the kids I treat in these settings have never read anything before at home. They don't do any reading. But now that they're locked up, there's not other things to do, and they're encouraged to read, and it's a way to get their mind off of the stuff at the facility and what's going on. Plus, there's a bunch. This Blue for High series is a very really nice series and really catches their attention. They really like it. So there is stuff that these kids get into, and all of a sudden they start becoming a reader, and they read a lot, and then they are forced to go to school, which they weren't on the outside. So then they start going to school. They normalize their sleep-wake cycle. I don't think that's all about the media, but many kids have told me, all I used to do was sit in school and think, I can't wait to get home to play those video games. I can't wait to get home to play video games. That's what kids think to themselves a lot of the time. And so the reality is kids caught up in these, who have crappy lives, and these kids have had really bad experiences, but these diversions or leisure things are now part of the problem for them and really a major issue. And we took him off of the mental health list. He did perfectly fine, left the facility, as far as I know, doing much better than he was before. And I've seen that many, many times. So, I think we should look back. I mean, if in Plato's Republic, he talked about how he would only let kids hear stories that are, in modern terms, like developmentally appropriate. So he wants them to hear stories that teach a lesson, right and wrong, in terms that hit them and that they will understand, guiding principles and values. And at the Temple of Apollo, of course, know thyself. So, people should look at themselves, and parents and practitioners have to look at their own media use and how they use it to understand these things. And this is, of course, in child psychiatry, a major issue because, as you saw in the studies, parental media use is very strongly correlated with the kids' use. So there's ideas in treatment that we want something simple rather than complex ways to solve these problems. And so I'm going to give you a simple idea for the media, but there is some research behind it, that these simple principles, if you get the right principle, are going to be more effective. It's this idea of heuristics, little tricks that you're going to use. It's just a rule, so you can always break it if you need to, but if you stick to your rule, no matter how phony the rule is, that might be better than trying to do everything on a case-by-case basis, which takes mental energy. And if you're dealing with kids, they can break you down. So if you're going to try to do this and that, and this in this situation, and that in this situation, and that and that, it might be better just to keep it simple. So my rule is honor silence. So I like the idea that silence is important. In 2015, we really need to turn things off and have time where we do not have any media clatter going on. So if parents do it and they choose, so I'm on record saying that no TV or video games on school nights, period. Until you join the Marines or go to college, that's just the rules, for my kids. So they accepted it. It's fine. They don't have a problem with it. So some people look like I have two heads when I say that. Like, no, it's normal. It's fine. They didn't blow up or anything when that happened. So you can have these simple rules and stick to them. And this idea of taking a fast every once in a while, definitely we need to separate from it, whatever things that we're caught up in. And for kids, the electronics in the bedroom is a big deal. We've got to get them out of the bedroom or we're going to have problems. So to back up my suggestions with another nice article, this Gentile article, parental monitoring of media, positively correlated. And this is any monitoring, as long as they monitor. Total sleep time and academic performance. So those families that monitor their kids do better. Interestingly, back to the personality development and some of the content things, R-rated movies seem to are correlated with bad academic performance. So there's something about getting access to things like that seem to have problems. Screen time is correlated with negative sleep. Prosocial and behavior aggression also associated negatively with sleep time. And once again, about the weight issues and exercise and stuff, BMI didn't seem to correlate that much. So there's a little less there than I think some people might believe. The reality is that, like I said, a lot of high-energy kids have a lot of media exposure. And then also, especially if they're doing active media, those ones don't seem as bad. It's the TV when they mindlessly eat, frankly. That's the biggest problem. So if they're playing video games or doing social media, doing other kind of stuff, their hands are busy, and they're not getting constantly food advertisements. So, those are some of the reasons they think that the weight issues don't seem to be such a big deal. So, one of the challenges in real life is that I say, my kids don't watch TV at all, so taking away TV from them on weeknights, not a big issue. Easy. I did it. They never made a fuss about it, or occasionally do, but it goes away. But for kids who have had that media, and they love it, and that's their thing, and then you're trying to take it away from them, then that is perceived as punishment. And, tit for tat, behavior, game theory, right? You're going to mess with me, I'm going to mess with you. You're going to be nice to me, I'm going to be nice with you. So kids, what do they do when you take their favorite thing from them? they mess with you. And so parents that have allowed their kids access to all these things and then are going to try to take it away, that will be perceived as punishment. So many families don't really have the cohesion and strength to fully take things away, and probably want to like pick their battles and be very careful. So clinically, you have to be real careful about how you address this. Because if you just tell them, turn everything off, and I always tell them, take the TV out into the yard, put a stick of dynamite underneath. Anyway, no one's ever done that, but that's my suggestion. So, and then, really all the stuff about how do you deal with defiant or oppositional kids, it's extinguishing negative behavior between building positive new behaviors and just moving forward and not getting back into the same battles. That's what will work. If they continually do it, but it's a project. It takes months. It's not going to be like this, and all of a sudden it's not an issue. And the parents have to use rewards and mostly positive interactions with the kids. That will build the relationship, and you'll go forward. And so this is a similar slide, though, in a different way. We have to know that a lot of these parents are not willing to change, and they're not just going to change because we told them that. That's okay. That's where they're at. I'm still going to give them the best advice I think I can and see what happens. And we sometimes have to give them that, if dad plays video games with the kids, but he doesn't interact with them very much, that reinforcer might be more powerful than my negative associations with all this other stuff. Sometimes we have to understand that they may have a problem with, eating too many cookies, but if grandma comes with cookies, you don't slap them out of her hand and say, how dare you, grandma, make cookies. You have to work with the things that are going on in their lives, and these relationships are really important and often trump everything else in life. So don't want to, acknowledge those reinforcers and don't want to work against them. I like these type of forums where rather than clicking out exactly what the history is or what their media use is now, how willing are they to change some of these things? It's impossible, could do sometimes, could do most of the time, could do almost always. So I just, increase your positive communication. Is that possible? Let me know, Can you turn off all the electronics 1 hour before bedtime? And you sort of just figure out, are they willing to work on one of these? And you get something where they're going to work on it, then you work on that. If they're not going to work, let them go, and don't fight a fight because you're not going to win. And as I've been saying, you mostly want to focus on the positives. Tell the parents, just try it, just experiment with a media fast for a weekend. Ask the parents to reflect on themselves, because that's most of these kids are not going to choose on their own to restrict their own media. You get teens that will do it, but you do have to understand that if you focus on the parents and get them to change themselves, you're going to have a lot more likelihood. They have to go, I don't watch TV on weeknights too now, right? Because I can't. If I tell my kids not to, I'm not going to do it. And that the exercise issue, I would say that the parents need to exercise and do stuff with the kids, and that's been shown to be, a major correlation. So you really have to the parents can't be sitting on the couch and demand the kid exercise. Plus, most of the parents I treat really need it too. Gyms, don't send people to gyms because those are for people that are already in shape. So gyms are for people in shape. Most of the patients I treat won't go to a gym and be successful and pay money for that and drive to it and all that. I like exercise in nature, walking, doing, those kind of hiking, anything that gets you into nature. John Ratty said exercise in nature is nature squared. I really like that. I think that's where it's at. So, 10 minutes to spare, about right on time. Questions or comments?
Very nice.